Solar and lunar energy. This is not about gender. Women have solar energy. Men have solar energy. Women have lunar energy. Men have lunar energy. Progress and healing can only happen when both solar and lunar energies are integrated within each individual across the gender spectrum.
Howard, I thank you for these words because masculine and feminine have all kinds of trappings. Solar and lunar frees us up to be fully ourselves.
And I think of the lunar as heart-centered, intuitive, receptive, holding space, and then I think of the solar as more linear, moving forward, logical, rational, and that's just my kind of off the top of my head.
That I think it covers it.
The lunar leads and the solar executes. References to the sun and moon are found throughout ancient history, in mythology, religious tradition, and science. Whether evidential or metaphor, each of us have both lunar and solar aspects to ourselves. This knowledge enables there to be a new frame of reference from which to describe who we are and puts aside problematic language such as the feminine within him or the masculine within her. It provides a fresh way to enable each of us to embrace and integrate the essence of all the aspects of our being and our true nature.
Hello world, it's me, Dennis, and welcome to the Parliament of World Religions. We are discussing solar, lunar, and these aspects of the human personality and how they impact us through these amazing lights that I have. First, I'm going to introduce Clay Boykin, my co-producer and the driving force behind In Search of the New Compassionate Male. Look at our panel that we have here. Would you please take us around?
Sure. We have with us Ann Smith, co-author of the book Stories from the Circle, Women's Leadership and Community. We have Howard Teisch, author of Solar Light, Lunar Light, Perspectives in Human Consciousness. And we have Pat Farrow, author of Sacred Marching Orders, Igniting the Solar Feminine at the Dawn of a New Age. And I'm Clay Boykin, and I'm the author of the book Circles of Men, a counterintuitive approach to creating men's groups, and the creator and host of the podcast In Search of the New Compassionate Male.
Wonderful. When I first heard of this concept, I have been all my life, I have been both a lunatic and a solar fan. And I feel like I'm solar powered and also that the moon is coming in. And I was really trying to understand how these impact me in my personality, in my personal, individual, spiritual growth and how they impact. And it wasn't until I met you four that I began to understand how it works. So, Pat, you've done a lot of work in this, and you've done a lot of work in the solar and lunar and how these aspects of the personality come out. Could you talk a little about that and start us off, please?
I had written a book with someone called Sister Stewarding the Shift. And I worked with a beautiful editor, and it was like floating down a lazy river. And the process was wonderful. The experience was wonderful. And when it was ready to go to complete, it wasn't readable because it was too meandering. And so what happens is I started working with a different editor who told me I had to throw away that entire book and start over. And what happened when I did that is that I feel like this happened in the middle of a blizzard in Ann Arbor, Michigan, that I was hit with the solar feminine. I was not very familiar with the term solar feminine. I did hear it through a woman named Lucia Renee, who wrote the book Unplugging the Patriarchy. And she spoke about the solar feminine as something that energies that came in onto the planet through Kuan Yin in 2005. And what I learned at that time about the feminine was that it was activation of the lower chakras of the actual biological woman. That was my understanding. And then I came to understand more and more about that, gave language to what I called at that time the lunar feminine, which was the feminine that was what we normally think of as females, receptive, nurturing, caretaking, intuitive. So that was really my introduction to the solar lunar feminine. So that's enough of a little background story.
Wonderful. And Howard, you had an insight about this in the solar and lunar aspects, correct?
Well, I had a torture of having been in the best analyst, archetypal analyst, the major Jungian analyst. I lived in San Francisco and was a great student of it for 15 years and absorbed the anima and all the Jungian words, which are somewhat popular, particularly anima and animus are not Jungian. I understand they're religious sometimes. And I did it well. And I finished with the last of 5 or 6 analysts as a student and as needing it. And I was profoundly still depressed. I didn't know what to do. And I saw a movie that turned me on to, the movie was called Kiss of a Spider Woman. And the Spider Woman turns out to be the mother of twin heroes in the Navajo culture. And I found that Joseph Campbell had written 5 years before Hero with 1,000 Faces about the Navajo twin heroes. And I jumped into it, and the rest of my life changed, where I learned that one of the twins of a indigenous warrior culture was actually a lunar male spirit. And the other one was a solar male spirit. And after their initiation, they got names, which were Monster Slayer and Child-Born of the Water. And water had always been associated with the anima and the feminine. And so once I saw it was a masculine spirit, my life changed radically 30 years ago. And I can't imagine anything getting me here to this amazing group other than understanding that and all that's happened since using that language.
And Anne, that's astonishing. What about you, Anne? What was your journey into the solar and lunar aspects of your personality?
Well, I have spent the majority of my life doing women's leadership training, healing, empowerment, helping them to step into their power. We never use the words solar power or lunar power, but that's exactly what we taught. And I wish I would have had that 30 years ago. So the leadership programs I did were religious and spiritual. It was through the Episcopal Church and the Anglican Communion, and it went throughout the world in every culture. And women would step into their power when they believe in themselves. And that power, I know, for me, always comes from God. And it is both lunar and it is solar. And so, Howard, I thank you for these words, because masculine and feminine have all kinds of trappings. Solar and lunar frees us up to be fully ourselves. And the definition I heard when we did a leadership program is, what is spirituality? And this incredible theologian, a Black woman, said, it is when you are fully yourself.
There's such an integration there. You felt that, haven't you, Clay? I mean, you and I were on the air when we first heard this concept, and it absolutely rocked me.
Similar to Anne, I had my corporate time, and prior to that, in the Marine Corps, and my language was servant leadership, and I was bringing heart into an organization and so forth. But I reached a point where something was missing. And I felt this emptiness inside. And my way of working through it was to start a men's circle, because I figured if I had this emptiness, somebody else did too. And it was keeping me from being complete. And so over the past 9 years, we've learned how to, what we would say, connect head and heart. When COVID hit, we pivoted and started a podcast, In Search of the New Compassionate Male. And it was along that, and Dennis, you were right alongside me during this time.
Absolutely.
It was during this time when we were interviewing people from all over the world, all walks of life, women and men, that we met, stumbled across our friend Howard.
And I have one of the things that I love about what you said, Anne, was that it takes, once we get into the solar lunar, it takes us out of this bifurcation of try to put us into a separate camp, and it brings us all together, because we can each have these aspects of these wonderful, this wonderful life-giving and then tidal moving aspects of the planets that come from us. And that's the thing that excites me about that, because it takes the labels off of it. I find that whenever I get into labels, I am, what Richard Feynman said is that God is too large for the stage, which is beyond my ability to conceive of. And the instant I attempt to conceive of the spirit, I'm limiting it, and so I've not done it. And that's what I love about Howard and Anne and Pat and Clay. What we're talking about is being able to break out of that, so that we can bring those aspects of it. Clay, you were talking about how the difference between what the lunar does and what the solar does and what the lunar does. From your understanding of it, from what Howard had taught us, could you bring that down, because that particularly speaks to me.
Yeah, I'll pick up when I was talking about head and heart. We were still missing a point. There was something that wasn't quite right, because the guys are always told, well, go to your heart, learn to be in your heart. And a lot of us would say, well, I got to leave my head behind. And conversation over. Mm-hmm. But when Howard started talking about solar energy and lunar energy, solar and lunar, and equating it to the various aspects of me, things started to fall into place. And one of the most profound things that Howard said during one of our podcasts, and of course I knee-jerked at the time, being an old Marine, but he said, Clay, the lunar leads and the solar executes. And I thought about that for a moment, and I said, he's absolutely right. Leadership is from here. And it just became so clear, because what happens? We're all up here in our heads. We're cut off at the neck, and we're trying to lead and execute up in our heads. And we've forgotten this whole part of our being. And we've left the heart and soul in the dust. So when Howard talks about solar energy, lunar energy, it really, really resonated with me.
Pat, you've seen the rise. We're seeing all around the planet. I was born in Mexico. Mexico has 50% of its legislature is women. Mexico, macho Mexico, 50% of my country's is women. We're seeing it in Chile with an entirely new constitution that they've written, that they're written to include. So we're seeing the rise of the divine feminine. We're seeing the rise of this around the world. You're seeing that too, right? I mean, you've been here through this process, haven't you?
Well, it's kind of my thing. I wrote a book back in 2009 titled "What Happens When Women Wake Up," and I've been watching women wake up for a long time, and there's an exponential expansion to that. But I'm also watching men move into their hearts. And my lens of the solar lunar is that expression and connection with the heart, to me, is the lunar. We still do at this point have biological genders.
Right.
And so the rise of the feminine, and that is, to me, women standing in their power, and then also connecting as they step up into their power. I don't know if that answers your question or not.
It's part of it, but as we're talking about in the Parliament, we're talking about how within the religious structure, like within the Anglican structure in this, how are we seeing breakdowns in this so that we're all genders and along the spectrum are being heard?
Or not. And I want to say that real clearly. There is not women's equality in the world. Women's voices are not at the decision making when it comes to allocation of money, when it comes to should we go to war, should we be able to do the conflict resolution. There is a UN resolution by the Security Council called 1325 that has called for that 10 years ago, 20 years ago. The violence against women has increased. There's an awful story coming out of Afghanistan. The women gathered together. They raised $1 million to get the women leaders out of Afghanistan because they knew they would be murdered. They're being murdered. We certainly see some improvements, but in the crisis of the violence against women and nature, it is not nearly enough. And so this is where women need to have their solar power. Men need to have their compassion for what's going on with the women in the world and the environment, and we all need to work together. To me, what is so good about solar lunar, it is complementary. Howard, you gave us that word, and I loved it. We can use both of those qualities, all of those qualities, when it's needed, and we don't need to ever be divided again. But I think we are fooling ourselves if we believe that there is women's equality anywhere in the world, because there's not, even in the Scandinavian countries. So yes, there's becoming more and more, but the allocation for women's programs, for women's resources, et cetera, is not happening. I mean, the UN is being accosted for this. Everybody, it was like the UN, there is some really strong statements going out that we have had lip service for so long about women's equality, women as decision-making. It has not happened. And now show us the money and let us be at the table and listen to us and take us seriously. That's the message. So there's no women's equality. There's just none. That's why the violence has increased.
Agreed. And so are we seeing that we can, this gives us our opportunity to be able to say, okay, let's take a look at it and let's see how can we move. Is the conversation different today within the leadership ranks than it was 20 years ago? Are we starting to see the conversation begin to evolve there? And that's where I want to see. Pat, do you see the conversation changing?
Boy, oh boy, that is a hard question. I see women supporting other women in a way that I have never seen before. And of course, women are in some positions that maybe they haven't been before, just as African Americans are in some positions they haven't been in before. Mm-hmm. But the structure still is very much still in place.
Yeah.
The structure of oppression.
And I have to say, I just want to jump, and even the language, when we constantly say our prayers and when we do our worship, it is usually God the Father or Lord. It is very hard. Mm-hmm. And we've been working on this for years to change the language for as God as Mother, Father, or she, exactly. He. And so again, and when that is constantly, and we're doing a panel at the Parliament that is, when we honor the divine feminine, we will stop violence against women and nature. And it is so important to do that. And it's also very important to have this new language, have this new concept that Howard has given me, for me to be in touch with my solar and my lunar, and to have everybody freed up to work together.
If I can, I'm sorry.
Please go ahead,
yes,
Pat.
If I can speak into this, your word complementarity, which is a word I'm totally in love with, that I heard from you, Howard, is to me, it's a dance. And in a dance, people they're moving together, complementing one another. So that, I think, is what is so beautiful about the idea and the energy of lunar solar, is that it becomes a dance rather than a war. Rather than the war of the sexes, it becomes the lunar and solar dancing together, or both lunar and solar within both genders. And I know we have many genders.
You know, what really hit home for me was, as Howard was explaining, you know, the lunar male and the solar male, the lunar female and the solar female. And what that brought to mind was, we guys are trying to reach down and integrate lunar with solar. Women are reaching up to embrace the solar and integrate the solar. The only problem is, we guys are resisting this move to integrate the lunar, and then we're pushing the women down, forcing them to stay more in their lunar energy. And it's only when both genders in the spectrum embrace both solar and lunar and integrate together that we're all playing with a full deck.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I have to say something here again. I have to. I agree so much with what you just said, Clay. Rather than reaching up, we've lived with a transcendent God for a long time. And in the solar feminine, as I see it, it's the activation of the lower three chakras, which is reaching down into Mother Earth. That, I think, is being grounded in Mother Earth and experiencing our connection with Gaia, Mother Earth. It's a huge part of the solar.
That's something, how language, we say things we don't even, even though we're trying to move our language forward.
Right. Yeah, I do it, you know.
Yeah,
I do it too. And one of the things because out in space, there is no up or down.
Right.
There is no, and if these are just relative concepts, they're not absolute concepts. And so that's what I love about this. Howard, this is what I love about the lunar and solar, is that we actually get an opportunity, because without one or the other, this life does not exist. They need both. We need the tides. We need the churning of the primordial soup. We need the light and the wonderful work to be able to do it. They have to work together in order for us to have life.
I think the only thing I could add to this amazing experience for me right now is we, talking head and heart, we really metaphors for the nervous system, which runs the show from life to death. And so it's a whole system that when we talk about one or the other, we're still missing the nervous system. And that, I'm learning, is the key to energy. Because the only thing I can add is solar and lunar are energy of nature. And so we're all within our own gender by calling it we call it multiple things. We're also saying that solar lunar is from nature guiding us in the moment with language, which is definitely something that came after nature and after gender, hooks back it into a sacred marriage. And alchemy is the endpoint that births the divine child. And I think almost all religions and life forms have them individually or not in birthing the divine aspect of ourselves by a sacred marriage, whatever we want to call it.
I love that because there is an integration within me. So there isn't an other. There is all part of the one. We're all part of the one. So if my entire personality is integrated, if I'm no longer separated into different aspects of myself, but I'm actually brought together, that gives me a sense of that namaste, that the place where there is only one of us. When you are in that place in you, and I am in that place in me, there is only one of us, and that's the integration where I feel that. This makes me feel so hopeful. And how do you maintain I know that because you're in the social justice movements and working through within the hierarchies and have experienced this, how do you maintain your hope? How do you maintain your positive outlook and knowing, get up in the morning again and to say, okay, we're going to move forward with all the injustice that we see in the world, that we're seeing right now, and that I'm going to stand up and get back into the fight?
I call myself a circle evangelist. And I have worked for years and years, even when I was working in the patriarchal structures of the church. We did everything in circle, everything in a women's sacred circle. And in a circle, that is where the complementarity truly happens. That's where we can be solar, lunar. That's where we can have our gender fluidity. That's where we can be free to be you and me. And we always organize, Dennis, around the dream. And the dream is the lunar power. And then we choose to work together based on our passion and and responsibility in the solar and carrying it out. And that's how dreams happen. When you dream together and you work together with that solar energy, they will happen. So I get to work with dreamers and people who are always for the positive, for the new thinking, for the new being, and for creating something so wonderful. And we know it is, it just doesn't make the news, but Howard, we know it's a happening. We're going to tell it. And our news doesn't always get into the news, but I'll say in the women's circles, we know what's happening. And we know that the lunar power is just as powerful as the solar power.
There was a time when what you just said would have been threatening to me. Because if the women gain power, that means the men lose power. But that's not it. It's a yes and.
Yeah.
It's a yes and, bringing the richness of both together create something neither one of us would have ever dreamed of. So thank you for saying what you just said.
Thank you. I mean, that's synergy, isn't it, Howard? Isn't that the
I'd
principle?
say that is an example of what happens physically at childbirth. When the two species came together and produced a child, and that is just multiplied, and now we have an opportunity with consciousness and the crises involved to return back to that mindset of creation. And each one of us, and as a world, create something like happened back then in some new version with consciousness.
That's amazing. It is and I love this opportunity to be able to see this. You know, I think of that sperm and that egg and watching watching that go through the DNA divide and grow and create and see how we're doing it. And we can do that same thing in our consciousness. It isn't merely in the physicality of it, but in the consciousness of it as we grow and raise and get into a different ways and more sophisticated ways of thinking that are beyond what we've seen over this past year. I've been thinking about this historically, because we're not that far out of the pre-machine age of we're just, this is when we're looking over let's say the 3 million years when human beings have become here. In this last couple of 100 years, have we begun to see some significant shifts in what we're. And so over that period of time is a very small amount of time for this change in consciousness to happen, even though to us it seems like an eternity.
I can comment. When Watson and Crick discovered DNA, they discovered the secret was complementary pairs. And that is what made the acknowledgement that is nature, complementarity. And that's what made what DNA is, and some of the misconceptions that have actually pointed out that epigenetics, the environmental signals, are what activates, in addition to the DNA as its partner, which all came out of that. In complementarity consciousness, you're basically living creation story.
Living the creation story. That is that. Have you changed in your sense of what the creation story is? Has it evolved for you in your writing and in what you're seeing in the evolution of your consciousness?
That's a heck of a question. I was raised Catholic, so I knew it well. I knew it well, and that gosh darn Eve, she ruined everything for everybody. I knew it well. And then I happened to come across these other creation stories, and some of them included goddesses and Mother Earth, and I'm going, oh my gosh, maybe I'm not so bad. So I guess that's as much as I have to say about that right now.
It is an extraordinary process in that for me. You've evolved in your sense of the creation stories, Anne?
When I first heard the universe story, this was back in the 90s, by these two gentlemen. One was very short, Thomas Berry, a Catholic priest and monk, and one was very tall, and that was Brian Swim, scientist, cosmologist. And they said, it's time for a new story because the old story is killing us. So what they did was bring to life through books and videos the new story that begins with the Big Bang, 13.7 billion years ago. And at birth, the universe, at birth, our beautiful Mother Earth, that was, now they say 4.5 billion years ago. And it birthed us 200,000 years ago. And what this story has done is brought us into relationship with the stars, the sun, the moon, all creatures on earth, and one another. And that we're just a blip in this story. And we need to get our blip right. And so what it does for me is to help me to see I don't need to just be pondering myself, but in the greater picture. And the greater picture is so miraculous. When those two gentlemen would speak, it would say, just imagine how the Creator created the sun to be just this distance from the earth. so that we would have this perfect climate that we could thrive. So let's just enjoy this new story that brings us together.
One of the things that was so helpful to me was when I made the shift from a God outside of myself to understanding that for me that God is a principle. It's a law, like gravity, like it's a law. It's absolutely in everything, in every place, and it's a law that is subject to its own ways of being and its own ways of manifesting, and we can use that law. I can use that law, and that assuming that if we're going to understand if God is love, what if God is love? What if this sense of when I feel love, I'm actually experiencing the thing that people try to write about or put some to say that that's God. Okay, well, what if I'm experiencing that, and that there are certain human beings on that are able to experience that love in such an absolute way that they merge into that full consciousness of at-one-ment, atonement. They become one with that because they are absolute pure love. So that so now that takes me into an idea of, okay, well, there's a principle, and I can use that principle instead of having to work at it as if there's some being outside of myself.
I just want to say namaste to that.
It's very interesting because so much of this is about language. Language matters. And I say, well, God is love. God is this. God is that. And someone recently said, well, Clay, you're kind of objectifying. You're trying to define God. And they said, flip that around. Love is God, not God is love. Love is God. And it's perhaps a subtle thing, but for me, it was huge. And I don't even think I understand how huge it is yet.
As humans who've left imagery secondary to language, and we're all built on light. That's just what we're made of, and matter, light and electrons. Light is love and God. I think probably the biggest metaphor for love is light. And so understanding those complementary lights of nature and then embracing them as humans with consciousness, that they're there unconsciously, you get the synchronicity of alignment, that using this language, because we're social animals who've used language as part of it, and to bring back language and imagery into an alchemy of oneness, when the complement is there, to me is the continual eternal search.
Absolutely. And this gives us our opportunity to really to both heal and to come into a new way, and come into a new way of relating with one another, into a new way of offering one another the kind of compassion that we know that is there. Oh, Anne, any closing words that you'd like to share with us on your lunar solar experience and what this is going on in your life right now?
Excitement when young people hear this. The excitement, they get it immediately. Mm-hmm. The whole he, she, he and her, gender fluidity. They are so tired of us old people and trapping them into this lack of really being who they are fully meant to be by God. And so the excitement is what this is going to unleash for us as older people.
Yep.
But the permission it gives younger people to be free to be themselves.
The other day, I was on a taping that at the very end, I said, and how are we going to bring the young people along? And a woman on the panel said, that's the wrong question. How are the young people going to bring us along?
Well said. Patricia?
What seems to want to come through is 4 words: lunar, solar, complementarity, and dancing.
Yeah, and we need the men. We need you guys. We need you guys to really, the lunar aspect was never taken seriously. It was always seen as not powerful, right?
Right.
And so Howard, when you said that for us to save the world, the lunar needs to lead, yes, and the solar executes. And I was just like, wow, that is so important, because it is coming from our dreams, our spirituality, our love, our compassion. And then we carry it out with the clear thinking, the action, the movement, and going forward together. Because you all have the dreams. All men have dreams. All men have compassion. They're getting in touch with it through, but they all have it. We haven't given people permission to really tap into their potential.
You're so right. You're so right. And again, that's what I'm finding in talking with people all over the world. We guys have got this burn inside of us. And you've heard me say it before. We've got this burn, and we can't quite define what it is, but we know we're pushing it down. And so we're showing up in the world, not complete. No wonder we're doing what we're doing, because we haven't integrated it all.
Oh, God, what a wordsmith. Howard, thank you so much for the hard work you have done over the course of your life, the digging deep within yourself to bring this forward and to channel this through so that we could have your aspect of it, so that we could then take it as our own. That's one of the things that I love about your work, is that it is so open source. You are here, everything that you do, you want everyone to make use of, rather than holding on to it as your own. Your generosity is astonishing.
I'm here at the Parliament of the World's Religions, where the Solar Lunar lives. Back in the world, where I met you guys, is where the Solar Lunar lives also. Being here is an opportunity at the world level, is also where the Solar Lunar lives. In humbleness, this is beyond my words.
Thank you, Howard. Thank you so much, Clay.
I'm really grateful to have met Pat, Howard, and Ann. It's been a really growth opportunity for me, and it's added such texture and dimension to the work that I do in search of the new compassionate male.
Thank you, everybody. And so lovely to see you, Patricia, Howard, Clay. And thank you, everyone, for spending time with us on this track, the Parliament of World Religions.
We'd like your thoughts, so please feel free to contact us at any of the following email addresses: AnnSmith7144@gmail.com, PatriciaMFarrow@gmail.com, Howard@solarlunar.com, Dennis@DennisTardan.com, or Clay@ClayBoykin.com. Thank you.